Greetings. I'm Harvey Langholtz, the Executive Director of the Peace Operations Training Institute.
I'm Ramona Tahiri, the Chief of Content of the Peace Operations Training Institute.
We're coming to you today from our POTI headquarters in Williamsburg, Virginia, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this installment in our webinar series. Here at POTI, we strive to bring our students the latest, most up-to-date and current information on peacekeeping, conflict resolution, and related topics. And to that end, we are pleased to host this webinar today with two representatives of UN Women. We have with us Pablo Castillo-Díaz and Jennifer Wittwer. And we're happy to discuss today UN Women, the programs offered by UN Women, and in particular, the three courses that UN Women and the Peace Operations Training Institute provide by e-learning together. So welcome everybody, welcome Pablo, and welcome Jennifer. Let me first introduce Jennifer in more detail, and then we'll introduce Pablo, and then I'll invite you to offer your thoughts, please. Jennifer Wittwer is a senior officer in the Royal Australian Navy with 36 years experience in maritime logistics and human resources. She is currently seconded to UN Women for 2 years as a policy specialist and military liaison officer responsible for peacekeeping and sexual exploitation and abuse. Prior to this, she was implementing the Australian National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security within and across the Australian Defence Force. She also served as a gender advisor to NATO International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan in 2013.
Pablo CastilloDíaz is a policy specialist at UN Women, focused on efforts to prevent and respond to sexual and gender-based violence in conflict, post-conflict and emergency settings, mainstream gender equality in peacekeeping operations, and engage with the Security Council on Women, Peace and Security. Before joining the United Nations in 2009, he spent several years teaching international politics at various universities in the United States. He grew up in the Canary Islands and has a degree in political science and international relations from Universidad Complutense de Madrid and a doctorate from Rutgers University for his work on international criminal justice and conflict resolution.
So welcome Pablo, welcome Jennifer, good to have you with us today. And why don't we start out by your telling us a bit about UN Women in general and also your thoughts on the three-course curriculum that we offer together on implementation of Security Council resolutions on women, peace, and security.
Thanks, Harvey. It's a pleasure to be with you. UN Women is the United Nations entity for gender equality and the empowerment of women. It was only created in 2010. Previously, there were smaller offices working on gender equality, and these were merged in 2010. We stand for gender equality in all aspects of life, but obviously we are a relatively small organization within the universe of entities in the United Nations. To give you an idea, we have an annual budget always of around $300 million, which is approximately 17 times less than what UNICEF has for children, or 25 times less than our peacekeeping budget. So it's important that the other UN entities also continue to work on gender equality. For example, UNICEF's work on girls' education, or UNFPA's work on women's reproductive health. And UN Women focuses on these 5 particular areas of gender equality: women's political participation and leadership in politics, and the importance of gender equality in national governance, national policies, national planning, national budgets, all forms of violence against women and girls, improving women's economic empowerment, and then finally, women, peace and security, as well as protecting women and ensuring women's participation in humanitarian response. And Women, Peace and Security is the focus of these 3 courses, which we're very proud of because they provide a great opportunity for us to reach many people through online education systems. And the thought behind them a few years ago was really was really focused on spreading awareness about these resolutions about women, peace, and security in general to the large population of people that are working or want to work in peacekeeping operations. Peacekeeping operations began to gradually adopt in their mandates provisions on women, peace, and security. And these are our most powerful and visible tools in the UN. We have, at any given time, I think we have almost 100,000 military blue helmets deployed, as few as several thousand police, several thousand civilian staff. We wanted to reach this population, as well as the larger public. And I think that's what's happened. Lots of the people that are interested in working for the UN, for peacekeeping operations, are accessing these courses and learning about women, peace, and security. But anybody who is interested in 1325 and in the protection and the empowerment of women in conflict-affected settings can do so as well.
Thank you, Pablo. Yes, I appreciate that, and I agree with you. UN Women does an incredible amount of work on a very small budget, and when we think of the size of other UN organizations compared to the size of UN Women, and the challenges that you face and the important role that you and your colleagues play there, it's just incredible. So thanks for going through those details. And we have had several questions submitted in advance of this webinar by students, and if you're ready, I will read the first one, and we'll see how far we get down the list here. But the first question comes from Diana Rosso in Colombia. And Deanna asks, what strategies could be used for victims to forgive without re-victimizing them?
Thank you. That's an excellent question from Diana in Colombia. Just a couple of thoughts. At UN Women, we work with survivors of violence against women and sexual violence, and we engage them through services, but also in transitional justice processes, or helping them access justice. And in those processes, we're not pushing survivors towards forgiveness, which is an individual choice that they can make. But there are, within the transitional justice realm, which I think Diana is probably interested in, there are ways of working on reconciliation of communities, sometimes traditional mechanisms that lead to what they call healing. But we do work on making sure that all of these truth and reconciliation commissions and all these traditional mechanisms are done in a gender-sensitive manner that do not re-traumatize the person that is going through those processes. But it's an important question, because the reason why sexual violence and these crimes in particular are so horrific or are so effective is stigma, and it's the possibility of the victim to be traumatized twice, once by the perpetrator who's committed this crime against them, and secondly by the response of the people around them, sometimes unresponsive at best and often punitive and discriminatory at worst. And this is often, sometimes law enforcement or the community itself, especially in conflict-affected settings. But it can also, this re-traumatization can come from the people with the best intentions. Those that are trying to help. So sometimes those that are trying to investigate these crimes and conduct interviews of victims and survivors, or those that are helping women access justice and report these crimes and tell their stories in court or in truth commissions and all the rest. So I do encourage students to look at all our work on transitional justice and the type of ways in which these questions need to be framed, the survivors need to be treated, the confidentiality and dignity of survivors being obviously at the forefront, and all of the measures that can be taken to avoid re-traumatization.
Well, thanks, Pablo. I appreciate your excellent answer. You bring up some very important points that even those who are trying to help and try to bring justice can inadvertently actually re-traumatize the victim. It's a very delicate and important process. So I appreciate your outlining the sensitive and important points there. And our next question, Ramona has to put forward.
Okay. Our next question is from Rubiela Fontecha, a psychologist from Colombia. Rubiela asks, how could the UN Security Council resolutions on the Women, Peace, and Security agenda in Latin America and the Caribbean be applied to my country, Colombia? How do we develop it in our social community and clinical practices?
Thank you. In some ways, Colombia offers a powerful example of how 1325 or Women, Peace, and Security can be made real at the country level. And in the last few years, Colombia has been making a lot of progress in implementing their Women, Peace, and Security obligations. They've just gone through a peace process that has ended one of the longest conflicts in the world. And that was a model for the participation of women, both in consultations throughout the country, as well as in the official delegations to Havana, in the Havana peace talks, and the different modalities by which they ensured that women's voice was represented. And that has resulted in peace agreements, in comprehensive peace agreements that have over 100 articles or provisions that affect women and girls or gender equality or mention these things. So obviously working on the implementation of those peace agreements will be crucial. But they've also, in 2014, President Santos signed what we consider in the international community a landmark bill of women's access to justice. It recognizes sexual violence as a crime against humanity. No statute of limitations can be applied to it. Aggravating circumstances, like when it's used to retaliate or intimidate women's human rights defenders, which is typical in Colombia. Making sure that there's provisions for psychosocial assistance, for reparations to survivors. And in the last 3 years, over 8,000 survivors have received reparations, which is significant compared to most other settings in the world. A few years ago, we really had very few examples of survivors of sexual violence actually receiving official reparations in any setting of the world. So Colombia is a good example in that sense. And apart from that, they're putting a lot of emphasis on making sure that the military observers mission that is there now, verifying the laying down of the arms and the end of the conflict, that it has enough women. Often our peacekeeping operations are 97, 98% men. And in Colombia already in the first deployment, there were 15% women, which is much, much higher than the average in all other peacekeeping operations. And the Colombian government has insisted on that. So that's also important. But most importantly then at the community level, obviously these wonderful laws and these peace agreements need to be translated into work at the community level. Most of the conflict-affected settings are in regions where the state doesn't have a strong presence and the international community often doesn't have a strong presence. But it's at the community level where these wonderful peace agreements and these laws need to be made real. And so for community-based organizations and non-governmental organizations, it's very important to have access to their local government, their national government, as well as the international community, which has a significant presence in Colombia, so they can access funds and work in programs to assist survivors, but also to help reintegrate the high percentage of women that are members of the non-state armed groups that are being demobilized now. In the cantonment sites and in the places where they're laying down the arms, for example, they've seen a huge arrival of pregnant women that belong to that group, and no services or no provision for how to address them in those communities, as well as then how to reintegrate former demobilized combatants into populations with the problems that brings. And that's where the role of community actors and non-governmental organizations is crucial, but they need the funds and the protective coverage of the government and international community to do so.
Well, thanks, Pablo. Yes, I can see how Colombia certainly stands as a case study in how to face some of these very difficult questions and some of the important interventions that have been taken to try and address them. So thanks for going through all those details. The next question comes from Major Ahmed Khurshid from Pakistan. And he asks, how can we encourage people to bring awareness of the WPS agenda in their communities?
Thanks, Harvey. Look, it's always refreshing to hear men, especially military members, engaged in the women, peace and security conversation. Mm-hmm. And in my experience, momentum around this agenda can be achieved through one conversation after another. So, and I think that it behoves all of us who have been exposed to women, peace and security in some way to actually advocate for its implementation. So I'm going to respond to this question in a way that might assist military members particularly advocate for change and implementation around women, peace and security. So there are quite a number of things that I think that can be undertaken by military members, especially those who, for example, are undertaking this course and becoming more exposed to and understanding what the women, peace and security agenda is all about. Firstly, I certainly would encourage sharing and collaboration with civil society and women's groups. That's really important. And the first step could be just contacting the UN Women Country Office or Program Office to talk about, what are some of the issues that women are facing in that particular locality. Certainly holding and arranging for information sessions with their people, so with other military members, and using civil society and women's organisations' expertise to talk about the impact of conflict on women. Using national days like International Women's Day to promote women's rights and the women, peace and security agenda. Sending military members on gender courses or undertaking online courses like the Peace Operations Training Institute and UN Women, Peace and Security courses. And creating gender advisors in the organisation who can help mainstream a gender perspective across the organisation. Using women's organisations to help conduct assessments or gender audits of the situation with questions like, in what areas does your community not reflect women's rights? Because I think the important question is to talk about women's rights and women's equality. Assess what groups might be useful to supporting raising awareness within the organisation or within the community. So, for example, minority ethnic groups, women's organisations, migrant women's organisations, Indigenous women's organisations, internally displaced persons or refugees women's organisations, academic and research institutions, so universities, UN organisations, and of course local and national governments, so military and police. Activate for gender equality. I think that's really important. Men and women can both do this, and military members have, just as much right and I think and some authority to be able to do this within their own organisation. Certainly high-level leadership and a demonstrated public commitment to the inclusive development and implementation of a national action plan can help set UNSCR 1325 and gender equality high on the agenda and facilitate that public awareness. And I think that's the most important thing for those who are in countries where there are currently not national action plans on women, peace and security or some form of gender public policy. Military members who are exposed to women, peace and security can certainly activate and work with their other government colleagues in foreign affairs, women's affairs, ministries of interior and so on, and civil society to develop a national action plan. Certainly for the security sector, developing strategies that are appropriate for them to undertake. I think that it's very important the process of collaborating on a national action plan, of course, provides an opportunity to further raise the awareness, and it's an open place to discuss and exchange information and to hold seminars and training information on women, peace and security.
Thank you, Jennifer, for those illuminating points and great advice on how to make implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda an inclusive process. Our next question is from Omar Hamid, a NGO worker in Iraq. Omar asks, given its current security situation, how can the Women, Peace and Security agenda be implemented in Iraq? How can local NGOs factor in its implementation?
Thanks, Ramona. I'd just like to, I suppose, reiterate again the importance of support for a national action plan. So my response is going to be fairly generalist and from a strategic policy development perspective. But certainly security sector reform is very important, and working with the security sector to develop gender strategies or training around the role that women play and women's participation in security sector. The National Action Plan, of course, and advocating for a National Action Plan enables enhancing the roles of women in public leadership and decision making, provides education, awareness and training on women, peace and security and human rights and gender equality. And also a National Action Plan can also build in the provision of services to victims of conflict-related sexual violence or sexual and gender-based violence. A couple of other ways that NGOs can work towards women, peace and security agenda is activism, and activism to remove discriminatory laws in the penal code, for example. Some of those for example, the right of men to discipline their wives, a husband only being punished for adultery if it occurs in the home, those kind of things. NGOs can help by activating activism to help remove those discriminatory laws and promote women's rights. And certainly activism to implement the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women reforms is also very important.
And if I can add two things, one is that as Jennifer mentioned, the National Action Plan is very important. Iraq is one of the very few countries in the Middle East and North Africa that has a National Action Plan, and because of, especially with the security situation, because of coverage, but also because of trust, national NGOs are actually a very important implementing arm of those National Action Plans. What they need is the budgets and the resources to do so. And that this is particularly important in the area of shelters for survivors of violence against women. For the last couple of years, especially in the wake of military operations that are liberating areas occupied by the Islamic State, there are, of course, thousands of survivors of violence against women or people at risk that need shelter and safe houses, and NGOs in Iraq have been clamoring for governmental protection so that they can run these shelters rather than only government-run shelters, because there's a need for many more shelters run by civil society that can take care of some of these victims, including LGBT populations and a broad array of victims. So from the international community, we've actually been advocating for the government of Iraq to allow this work and protect this work that NGOs are trying to do in Iraq.
Well, thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Pablo. Yes, I can certainly see the importance of local activism, legislation, and some of the unique problems faced in some of the countries that you mentioned. So I appreciate that. Let me get on with our next question, and actually this is a three-part question. This comes from Esburio Ma Roseline in Nigeria. And Esburio asks, first, why is sexual violence a concern for UN peacekeepers? Second, although the UN has taken steps to put Security Council Resolution 1325 into action, not all countries are making use of it. What can we do to achieve this, especially in Africa? And finally, in what ways can women, girls, and children be protected during pre- and post-conflict times?
Thanks, Harvey. Look, sexual violence, of course, is a concern not only to peacekeepers, but for the UN as a whole, and for the international community. And I think the majority of law-abiding peacekeepers as well, too. And that sort of behaviour undermines the UN's reputation and the mission's mandate, and it creates a raft of problems and short and long-term consequences that actually require vast resources and expertise, such as investigative services, prosecution liabilities, victims assistance and access to money, and short and long-term care services required. Sexual violence is a crime, and this behaviour that's been perpetrated by some peacekeepers, as reported in the last couple of years and prior, it doesn't meet the standards required by the UN, and probably in most cases by the relevant troop contributing nations. In relation to implementing UNSCR 1325 into Africa, again, I would reiterate that the main activity really should be around advocating and supporting the development of national action plans that cover all 4 pillars of 1325 and involve all major stakeholders in government, in non-government organisations, and in the security sector, etc. Also partnering with key NGOs, women's groups, for example, and also UN Women, country office or program office to promote and advocate for gender equality and women's rights, because of course that's the premise for 1325, and lobbying for and supporting women's active participation in peace processes, all levels of government and police, security and military forces, I think is really important. I'd certainly like to highlight that there are now 63 UN member states with national action plans, and this has grown from about 46 in 2014. And I think it's important to note that this significant growth has occurred because of the international recognition of Resolution 1325 as a way to build sustainable peace and security, and also, of course, by advocacy and lobbying by civil society. So there's a huge role for civil society to play in the women, peace and security agenda. And also UN Women has some capacity to assist with this. For example, Kenya at the moment is working with the Ministry of Defence on looking at some strategies to raise the level of participation by women in the security sector and the roles they can undertake. In terms of the protection of women, girls and children during pre- and post-conflict times, of course, there's always the physical protection by military and police forces and peacekeeping forces, of course, but I think the longer-term development of the environmental conditions is required in order to change or reverse women and girls' vulnerabilities during conflict. So things like access to education and increasing their participation in education. The greater representation of women in public life, of course, is a very key element of this. Equality in all aspects of their lives, in their home and in their communities and in public life. And certainly economic empowerment, their ability to work and their access to resources.
Well, thanks, Jennifer. I appreciate your comprehensive response to that 3-part question, which of course posed some difficult issues, real problems. That, of course, is what we try to address here. We all know that SEA is a crime, period. There's a zero tolerance in the UN for this. It's a problem that we confront and fight against. I'm glad to hear that there are 64 nations with a national action plan. That's certainly progress, and we hope for more. And I completely agree with you. We all know the important role that civil society plays in this. So thanks for that good, comprehensive answer. So that's all the time we have in terms of questions. Before we do close, though, Jennifer and Pablo, I invite you to offer any closing thoughts, remarks that you may have.
Look, I think the last thing that I'd just like to reiterate is the capacity and expertise that can be provided by UN Women to support individuals or organisations in your country or your region. Contact our country office or program office or regional office in your country and start the conversation around how either you can contribute or UN Women can actually assist you in implementing women, peace and security into your organisation or into your community.
Yeah, thank you, Harvey. Just to say that we at UN Women are very encouraged by the sheer number of students that are showing an interest in this course and taking this course. I think we have about 1,000 different people taking this course every month, and that's been consistent for years. And just to reflect that, the first time I started working on these issues was 12 years ago, and in that period, and in that span, and in the span that these courses have been available online, a lot has changed. 12 years ago, international jurisprudence on crimes against women in war was only beginning to emerge. These atrocities were often invisible and not reported. They still happen, but they're much more visible, reported, investigated, punished sometimes. We had less policy frameworks on women, peace and security. We only had 1 resolution. Now there's been 8 in the Security Council. We have 64 national action plans on women, peace and security when we had 4 or 5 when we started a few years ago. And women's exclusion from the peace table and from peace negotiations and from peace and security decision-making in general was seen as normal and accepted, and that is changing. So we have a long way to go, but obviously the people joining us in this movement and are really taking part of history, and we hope that through this course we can reach many more people and have many more champions throughout the world on the Women, Peace and Security agenda.
Well, thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Pablo. Appreciate your good answers and summing up. And Pablo, I completely agree with you. I'm so excited to see the number of enrollments that we have in these courses, 1,000 a month. We have a 3-course suite, and the title of each course is similar, but then they're focused on different regions. The titles are The Implementation of UN Security Council Resolutions on the Women, Peace and Security Agenda in Africa. That's the first course. The Africa course is available in English and French. In Asia, and then the third one is in Latin America and the Caribbean, and that one is available in English and Spanish. So I sometimes picture, even though these are online courses and people are remote all around the world, 1,000 a month means 30 per day, 30 individuals worldwide in their homes, in their villages, wherever they are, enrolling each day. And I just picture that's the size of the same number that would be in a classroom. And this is the impact that we are able to have through our cooperation between UN Women and the Peace Operations Training Institute. And I sometimes look at where these students are from. No, they are not all of them, by far, from New York or London or Paris or Sydney. Where are they? They're in the small towns and villages from the 3 regional areas covered here: Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And you notice that's where our questions came from those 3 regions. So it's a pleasure and a privilege to be able to work with UN Women and reach out and serve this large population every single day. So thanks again, Jennifer and Pablo. We appreciate your time, your expertise, your ongoing efforts for peace and for women, peace, and security. And for our students and viewers, thank you for your excellent questions and for participating in this webinar. This session will be archived on our website and available to students for future viewing. And thanks again to Pablo Castillo-Díaz, Policy Specialist at UN Women, and to Jennifer Wittwer of the Royal Australian Navy, and seconded to UN Women and responsible for peacekeeping, sexual exploitation, and abuse. And my thanks also to my colleague here at POTI, Ramona Taheri, our Chief of Content. I am Harvey Langholtz, the Executive Director of the Peace Operations Training Institute. Thank you very much, and we look forward to your continued participation in this webinar series.